Can you share how you frame a conversation for somebody that's like, I don't know how long I want to work. Like I may want to retire early, I may not.
All right. Thank you for joining us. This is episode 2 of our new series, Retirement Readiness Journey. Pretty excited. First one, we kind of unpacked understanding your net worth and really where we start when we're looking at the 10-year lens from being out from retirement date. So this one, we're going to kind of pivot. So Chris, pretty exciting. We're going to talk about today's topic is, how to define your retirement goals.
This is more of the fun stuff that we work on. This is where you ask somebody that and their face either lights up or you just see a blank stare.
Right.
They really haven't put any thought or time into sort of this part of the equation. I really think some of the stories that we add in will be helpful for listeners as they sort of go through this process on their own.
Yeah, and it is really interesting, kind of what you alluded to. When I see that glazed look, and I'll say to clients, I'm like, you know what? Don't worry, I'll make up your goals. And they're like, what? I said, I've been doing this long enough to know what you're probably going to think about and what you should think about. So together we're going to figure it out. So that's the fun part. And really what you said, this is the fun part. It's when you were a kid, like, what do you want to do when you grow up? Like, what's it look like? So we'll talk a little bit about some of the goals and strategies and how we kind of help clients sort through what they should be thinking about and what some of those goals may be.
Yeah, and I think through our lens of this being, plus or minus 10 years away from retirement, this is really, in a lot of cases, the first time that somebody is, asking this question to this individual, and they're saying, wow, this actually isn't that far away. And it tends to sink in. And we just say, start somewhere, get something down, out on paper in our software, of course, and then, let's go from there. But we actually have the process of putting that out there and then obviously backing into some of the other pieces that we're talking about for how do we actually get there.
Yeah, and I think the fun part is, to go back and look, what was your goal 10, 15 years ago? Because they'll change over time.
Interesting.
What I really, I tell clients, we're talking to clients a lot and we'll say, look, what you start with, we got to start somewhere, and this is going to change, right? This is a journey. This is not literally we're going to be beholden to this number, to these goals, because life's going to change. You might be in this job, you might be in another job, your family, you might be moving. There's all kinds of factors that come in, but it's so much easier to pivot when you've started somewhere. We can think about, we call them the what ifs, like what if this happens, what if that happens, but really just starting somewhere and kind of outlining, hey, I got some basics, like, living, those are good. That's a goal. That's a number one goal. It really kind of helps kind of get everything started.
Yeah, we'll talk about some of the lifestyle pieces for the purposes of our theme of 10 years away from retirement. Can you share how you frame a conversation for somebody that's like, I don't know how long I want to work. Like I may want to retire early, I may not. I like work, but I don't love it. And can you just talk about what you would say to somebody who's like, I'm not really committed to one time frame or another?
Yeah, and so we'll start with, okay, if you're not quite sure where you want to start, let's go with 65. That's a common number. A lot of people, so if you're going to work till age 65, what is that? What do we need to do to get there? What do you think you want to do between now and then? And what does retirement, what would that look like? Do you want to be sitting on a beach somewhere? Everybody said, we heard that's like, well, I want to be at a beach. And I'm like, well, what beach? Because that one beach is more expensive than the other beach. So we really kind of delve into, hey, it's not just about sitting on the beach, like, drinking a Corona and watching the waves go in and out. Like, what else are you going to do? Like, are we going, who's going to be on the beach with you? Who are you going to be spending time with? Where are the kids going to be? Do you have kids? Do you have something that you're passionate about that you're maybe going to switch your time to, and maybe you want to do some volunteering? Or what are your hobbies? What is something that if you weren't working, you would do all the time?
Yeah. And I think that when you set that line in the sand at 65, some, thoughts around that is, well, is it going to be a hard stop at work, as in, the light switch flip out, or is it going to be some sort of way that you're going to scale back and phase out of work? And obviously that will look different from person to person, but this is where, we can say, well, let's try to model it this way and run one scenario, and then let's model, scenario 2 and 3 around some of the different pieces that may fall into place.
The dimmer switch idea.
The dimmer switch, yeah.
Because we do see that, especially if we have clients who are very type A and a very demanding, busy job. The light switch is a very challenging transition. And typically, we would say they typically fail at retirement if you do the light switch. So it's that dimmer switch approach where we might have with that client and go, okay, we're going to put this bogey number out here, but at that age, we're going to go down to 3/4 time. Then maybe it's half time. And then eventually we're going to hopefully take that switch and put it all the way off. In some cases, some clients don't. Especially if we have business owners who maybe transition the business to somebody else, but will continue to be involved at some capacity for a longer time. Right. Certainly family businesses is the scenario we see that happen. But having kind of a baseline, we can pivot from there, right? And that allows us to kind of say, okay, if this is the arbitrary goal, what if it was 2 years earlier or 2 years later?
Yep. And when you kind of go through that whole period of, hey, here's actually, where we're going to set our goals and then they ultimately retire. What's your experience around sort of the time frame? Is it 3 months? Hey, I have a new routine. Is it 6 months, 12 months? Is it all across the board?
It's all across the board. But one of the first things I tell clients is the next 12 to 24 months, we're just going to try to figure out what your new normal is, because their old normal, that was a routine they had for probably 40, 45 years. They got up, they went to work, they did this, they did, da. Yeah. When they get to retirement, you get up and you're not going to work. Yeah. When you're fully retired. So it's, what's that new day look like? What are we going to do? And a lot of that comes back to, helping them figure out what's going to be fulfilling to their life if they're not working, and how they're going to use that time and fill that time. Some clients, I would say, are great at it. I have a client who self-proclaims he was built for retirement, and he's done. He is. He's like the poster child. And then I have other clients where, they feel like they're lost, and we have to help them be like, okay, you were doing all these things, you were busy. We got to figure out how to, bring that back and give you a reason to get out of bed.
Yeah. And I think some of the stories that we've shared internally in different scenarios, one that sticks out to me that kind of hones into how are you fulfilled is recently from a client who retired. He was retired for about 6 months, and he shared a story with our other partner, and he said, I go to the gym, I go for an extra, 30 minutes. I come home and putt around, and I'll do the stuff that I normally do. I'll do it for an extra 30 minutes. Next thing you know, it's, dinner time, and he's thinking, how did he use his brain at all that day? Yeah. And, I know eventually in that case, he was getting involved in boards and just trying to, figure that piece out. But I think that's a very valid, part of the equation is how am I actually going to be fulfilled and use, my thinking and use my brain, so to say.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of times, we have some clients who they're just burnt out at, when that retirement date comes, and they think that's just the switch, right? They're done. Yeah. But what we see in the 3 to 6 months is like, I call it, they failed retirement. I have a client who has perpetually failed retirement time and time again, where I think he works more in what we consider retirement than he did when he was working full time. That's a joke. Like when I'm like, oh, how's your failed retirement going? Oh, okay, great. But that was really, he needed to use his brain. And that's what gives him purpose. He still gets paid for it. So I'm like, that's why he failed retirement, because he's still working. But it is interesting how everybody's journey is a little different. So, we really spend a lot of time asking those questions, and you got to keep asking them, and you got to keep saying, okay, how's this going? Like, what's an average day look like? What's down on the horizon? What are we looking forward to? Because that's a big thing. Yeah. Are we looking forward to a big trip? And one of the biggest things, as far as we're talking about goals, usually we see clients want to travel a lot. And then, we'll talk about, well, what does travel look like? Because usually the first couple years, the conversation is you're the youngest and healthiest you're going to be when you're at that time. So are you going to do bigger trips now? Because they're going to probably scale down over time.
Sure. So we talked about, kind of the different experience that we've had to leading up to this. Let's shift gears to actually how we actually implement this in our software, in our Money Guide Pro software. I think that would be helpful for us to unpack really how things are categorized and the reason why, and then some of the common, items that we have on there.
Yeah, so the software really goes into kind of your needs, wants, and wishes, right? So not everything is a 10. We consider a 10 as like we need money to eat, a house, yeah, absolutely, clothing, those types of things. Healthcare, that's a big one we have to calculate into there. So we have that basic living. That's usually your top goal listed, followed by healthcare. Then we might have in there they're all over the board, but cars, how many more cars are we going to purchase? Do we pay cash? Are we leasing? Those types of scenarios. Do we want to have money set aside for college education for maybe your children or your grandchildren? Is there a second home we want to buy, or are we moving? Because a lot of times we see people who will shift when they are moving. Are they charitable? That's, how much do we want to give to charity? Is that an annual gift? Is this something that it'll change? Home improvement, big one.
Yep.
One we typically see clients won't think about is, especially as 10 years out from this retirement date, they don't consider, I have to worry about that. And you're like, well, are you making improvements every year now? Or is that coming up or when things break?
The structure.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
How you structure that. There's always the one-offs, I want a boat.
Yeah.
Or I want X, Y, and Z. There's lots of, the fun thing is we can really kind of start thinking about and help them analyze, what are they doing now, but what do we need to replicate in retirement? Mm-hmm. And we got to plan for it. Mm-hmm. And so there's a lot of different areas we walk through, and having those open conversations about, hey, what are you doing now? What does that look like? What are you spending money on now? Because that'll give us kind of some insight into what are some of the goals down the road. And then one of the bigger ones too that we have to put out there is long-term care. What if something happens and you need long-term care?
If that would put them over the edge and really, really deter everything else in the plan. That's great. And I've seen commonalities, obviously, with all of those goals. And something that I think is very valuable, kind of getting back to the conversation piece, is I've tended to find myself putting more and more placeholders in the plan. And essentially, that's the idea of, I may want to do this or I may want to do that. Mm-hmm. I don't know what that'll look or feel like or how much money that will be. But it's enough. If it's enough, I'd say, to bring it up in a meeting with us, then we need to have that as a potential goal in your plan. And I think once clients kind of verbalize stuff that's on their mind and they get that out there in the open and we have it on there, that's been helpful for sort of making clients more comfortable with their situation and conversations over time. Yeah,
and that's a great point, because especially when you're 10 years out, it might be something that you're potentially considering, but you have no idea if it's even feasible or if it should even be on the table. Yeah. So it allows you, by having that placeholder where, as we kind of talked about, you can run these scenarios side by side and say, well, things look really good here. Now, what if we add in the second home? Yeah. How does that impact the picture? Oh, what if we add in the second home with the boat? All those things.
How are we looking?
Right. Yeah. Or maybe I'm on the beat, whatever that looks like. But it does give us that ability to kind of, and I think when you get to that what if side of things, that's where you really start to see the fun begin.
Yep.
Because especially when you're 10 years out, right? You're just thinking, how do I get from here to there and make it? And then now you're going, we can do these things, but what if we do this? So I think that's the really fun part where we really get to have some fun with clients and really just kind of explore, hey, what is it that, has been on your mind that maybe you haven't even discussed together?
Yeah. Yeah. Because unless you're, carving out time and, obviously everybody gets busy, they're likely not kind of verbalizing these things. The only other wrinkle I would add, really particular to the travel part of the equation, is that really looks different, I'd say, for most clients. Some clients, they have small, more frequent trips. Some clients have bigger, I'd say, trip every 2 or 3 years, something like that. So I just wanted to kind of add that in there. We curate that based on obviously the client, and there's no rule there. It looks different for everybody.
Yeah, because we have some clients who maybe have that second home. Maybe they have a beach house or they have a lake house, and they spend a lot of time going there, and they consider that their travel, and that's very different expense than going to Europe a couple times a year or wherever, having this big trip where you're going for a couple weeks. So it's certainly, I think what's really fun is that there's no one standard when you're working with clients. It's really kind of having fun and being like, what is it that you're doing now? What if you could wipe the slate clean and say what you would be doing, what would that look like? And then let's go see if it makes sense or if you can get there.
Yep. And the other fun part of the equation to emphasize is this is a living, breathing, piece of our software. Mm-hmm. And it's fun to go back to sort of this section over time with clients. Yeah. Hey, is this still, on your mind? What are your thoughts on this? We had this, here and sort of blocked off. Is that still something that you want to do? And then to get their reaction of, yes, I want to do that, at that year or this time, or no, that's kind of come and gone. So that's interesting also.
Yeah. So I think one of the fun stories I'll tell of a client, we listed all their goals out, and we started, 15 years ago before they were retiring, and listed what does it look like and the goals. And then as things kept getting better, we would start naming them. So we had, retirement fun, then it was more fun, and it was super fun. And then we solved for fun. So we got to run through all these different scenarios of like, well, what if we were spending $50,000 on travel in X, and what if we spent $100,000? So it was really just kind of fun to go through and kind of, so now when they come in, they're like, we're living in super fun. This is pretty cool.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great. And I think what you added in there with like the annual number, that, and a lot of times the travel piece is that sort of, oh wow, I have like that.
It's a psychological thing.
It's a psychological
it's a very
number.
psychological thing for clients.
It's a psychological number for sure. So, okay, we talked about like some of our thoughts on setting the goals and the value of communicating that in our conversations. Let's talk about when there's a disconnect between goals and income, and just some of the framing around those two things being on the same page.
Yeah, that's a tough conversation because, when you're starting the planning and they're here, they're hoping that you're going to tell them how it's feasible, even if it's not.
Yeah.
So that, a lot of times, we have to have tough conversations, and really it's saying, okay, here's where you think you want to be, but here's really what, you've got champagne taste, but we're not drinking champagne. We're not there. We can't afford it. Yeah. So we have to talk about where income is. And that's kind of what we talked about in our first episode, kind of understanding where you are in cash flow and net worth. And you can go back, and there's a link to this if you'd like to hear that episode. But really it's saying, okay, here's what your income is. Here's where the goals are. If we want to get from here 10 years out to there, we got to make some tough decisions, or we got to make some changes, whether that could be, we might need to look for a higher paying job. We need to control expenses. Maybe we need to get rid of the second property because, we're using it a little bit, but it's costing us, that's putting an impact on our long-term goals. So it's not always, hey, everything's going to be super fun or more fun. It's going to be, how do we even get to that point? And maybe we might have to consider retiring later. We might have to work a little bit longer, or we're going to have to adjust lifestyle now to be able to get there a little bit quicker.
And those are all the different levers, that can be pulled. And I think when we have those tough conversations at this stage, there's the sort of glass half full and glass half empty. Half empty, hey, we got to make some adjustments, and you can't have it all. Half full is you still have 10
years.
plus years. So that's a good amount of time to where you can actually move the needle, on some of the things that you're working towards.
Yeah, I mean, we always say it's, the earlier you start planning, the better. But again, we tend to see people really start to think about this and come in our door 10 years out, right? They're 55, the kids are off, they're in college, they're looking around going, well, what are we going to do now? Because every other weekend I used to be at a soccer field or a hockey rink or whatever it is. And, what am I going to do? And how do I even get there? So it's all about starting in that 10-year period, even if, just where you are. Earlier is better, but typically start to see people thinking about this 10 years out.
All right. Well, that was a lot of fun, Rose. I think we did a really good job with adding, some of our thoughts around goal setting, a lot of client stories and experiences there. So hopefully the listeners found, a lot of value as they think, hey, I'm 10 years, how do I even start, about setting goals?
Yeah. And I think that's the first step is, again, kind of understanding where you are and seeking help to kind of, getting in front of a financial advisor and saying, okay, here's where I am. Here's what I'm thinking. Does this make sense? And how do we kind of shore up assets and make adjustments now so all of this can be a realization? So, we tell clients, no matter what your goals are, we're happy to help you live greater. That's kind of our motto. Our motto is, how do we get you from here to there? And, one of the best things I think, and one of the most rewarding, is like when a client gets to retirement and it's as good as they hoped or better.
Right. And you show them that snapshot going back, would you say 15 years and whatnot. That's a really cool story. Awesome. Yeah. Well, thank you as always to our listeners for tuning in. So this is our second episode of Retirement Readiness Journey. I think that the deeper we go down into, this sort of theme, the more value that we're going to be able to add. So as always, thank you for listening, and please feel free to pass this episode along to family and friends. And thank you.
And you can also go to vlpfa.com to sign up for a free consultation, and we can see how we can help you live greater.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Retirement Readiness Journey. If you like what you heard, please subscribe to our podcast and share our podcast with family and friends who are ready to start planning for their retirement. Book your complimentary consultation now at vlpfa.com. And now for our necessary disclosures. Securities offered through Cetera Wealth Services, LLC, member FINRA SIPC. Advisory services offered through Cetera Investment Advisors, LLC, a registered investment advisor. Cetera is under separate ownership from any other named entity. The views depicted in this material are for informational purposes only and are not necessarily those of Cetera Wealth Services, LLC. They should not be considered specific advice or recommendations for any individual. Neither Cetera Wealth Services, LLC, nor any of its representatives may give legal or tax advice. All investing involves risk, including the possible loss of principal. There is no assurance that any investment strategy will be successful. The views stated in this podcast are not necessarily the opinion of Cetera Wealth Services, LLC, and should not be construed directly or indirectly as an offer to buy or sell any securities mentioned. Due to the volatility within markets mentioned, opinions are subject to change without notice. Information is based on sources believed to be reliable. However, their accuracy or completeness cannot be guaranteed. Past performance does not guarantee future results.